Elvis Presley appeared in 31 movies and 2 concert documentaries during the course of his remarkable career, and about a third of his 31 feature films he did were based on or adapted from existing stories and novels. Let's take a deep look at the novels that served as the basis for Elvis Presley's films. Welcome to Anything Elvis. I'm Molly, a longtime millennial Elvis fan, and here's the story. Love Me Tender was Elvis' first film and the first to be based on a book. The movie was initially going to be called The Reno Brothers, the same name as the novel it is based on, by Maurice Jarretti. But because the song Love Me Tender became popular before the movie's release, the name of the film was changed to match. The screen rights were acquired by 20th Century Fox in August 1952, but the movie wasn't put into production right away because RKO Radio Pictures had already released a somewhat more realistic movie telling the story of the Reno brothers called Rage at Dawn, starring Randolph Scott in 1955. Love Me Tender was the only movie that Elvis did not receive top billing and played a historical figure. His role, Clint Reno, has originally been turned down by both Jeffrey Hunter and Robert Wagner because the part was too small. Loving You was Elvis Presley's second movie of his career and the second to be based on an existing story. The movie was adapted from a short story by Mary Agnes Thompson called A Call from Mitch Miller, which appeared in a June 1956 issue of the Good Housekeeping magazine. A Call from Mitch Miller is a story about a singer by the name of Lonesome Harris who became an overnight sensation singer for Tex Warner and his Red River Ramblers Western band. Producer Hal Wallace bought the rights of the story with Elvis playing lead in mind. In the movie, the name of main character that Elvis played was changed to Deke Rivers, and the name of Tex Warner's band was altered to the Rough Riding Ramblers. Loving You was also Elvis' first color film and the first for which he had top billing. The working titles for the film included Lonesome Cowboy, Running Wild, Stranger in Town, and Something for the Girls. But due to the success of Elvis' previous film being titled after a song of his, Love Me Tender, Wallace selected the final name for the film using the Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller ballad penned for the movie, Loving You. Elvis Presley's fourth movie, King Creole, was based on the 1952 novel A Stone for Danny Fisher by Harold Robbins, which told the story of a New York boxer. The book shadowed the effect of the Great Depression on a lower middle-class Jewish family and concluded with the main character, Danny Fisher's death in counterpoint to arrival of a new life. The title of the book, A Stone for Danny Fisher, is taken from the Jewish tradition of leaving a stone on the headstone when visiting a grave. The character Danny, played by Elvis in the film, however, lived. A Stone for Danny Fisher's rights were acquired by Hal Wallace for $2,500 in February 1955 with the intention of giving the lead role of a New York boxer to either James Dean or Ben Gazzara. Dean was eventually chosen for the role, but the production was shelved after his death in 1955. Following the success of an off-Broadway stage version of the story in January 1957, Elvis was suggested as a possible replacement, and after Elvis was finally selected for the part, the character of Danny Fisher was then changed from a boxer to a singer, and the location was altered to New Orleans from New York. Here we have the paperback edition of the book featuring a James Dean-like character on the cover. While filming King Creole, Elvis also did a similar pose to the book's cover, and it was this photo that later served as the basis for a French version of the film poster. Flaming Star was based on a 1958 novel by Claire Huffaker called The Brothers of Broken Lance. In April of 1958, Fox bought the rights to the novel before it was published, and a month later, on May 27, 1958, it was announced that Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra would play the Burton brothers. Filming was scheduled to start on June 16, 1958, with the title of the movie being changed to The Brothers of Flaming Arrow. However, after attempts to reach an agreement with Brando and Sinatra failed, the title was changed once more to Flaming Lance, which was inspired by the name of the family ranch in the novel. At the time, the novel was still being adapted for the screen, and the script narrowed the focus to just one brother, delaying the filming by an additional 2 years. Nunnally Johnson, an Oscar nominee for his numerous screenplays, and Huffaker, the author of the novel, were screenwriters of the film. It took Huffaker and Johnson 30 weeks to successfully complete the screenplay. Finally, on June 12, 1960, the production announced that Elvis would play the lead role of Pacer Burton, a character with different conception from the one that had been offered to Brando. In August of 1960, the title of the film was changed 3 more times, from Flaming Heart to Black Heart, then to Black Star, and at last to Flaming Star on September 2nd, 1960. Wild in a Country was based on the debut novel The Lost Country by J.R. Salamanca, which he wrote in over 7 years. The 1961 paperback edition of the novel was published to coincide with the release of the movie. Before the book was even released in March 1958, screenwriter and producer Jerry Wald bought the screen rights with Bradford Dillman intended to play the lead. The dramatic movie was originally not intended for a musical, but when Elvis was cast as the lead actor in the movie, his character's singing was written into the story. Once the book was turned into a screenplay, some adjustments were made. For example, Elvis' character became a writer. In the book, the character was an artist, and Hope Lane character Irene was changed from a teacher to a psychologist. The title Wild in a Country was taken from a Walt Whitman poem Leaves of Grass that Jerry Wald had always wanted to use for a movie. The original title for the film was Lonely Man, which was one of the soundtrack from the movie, but was cut out from the film after the title was changed to Wild in the Country. Follow That Dream was based on the 1957 novel Pioneer Go Home by Richard Powell. The novel is based on a true story and was published in a shortened version in Reader's Digest. At first, Powell was unhappy that Elvis had been chosen for the role, but after seeing the finished film, he thought that Elvis had performed the role very well. Pioneer Go Home was considered as the name of the film, but it was ultimately changed to Follow That Dream because the composers of the film's theme song were unable to come up with a term that would rhyme with the word pioneer. Other titles considered were What a Wonderful Life, which is the soundtrack and the opening song of the film, It's a Beautiful Life, and Here Come the Quimpers. Similar to Flaming Star, Follow That Dream has stayed relatively true to its original plot, except for a few incidents from the book that could have been, but did not, expanded upon in the movie. For example, Toby and Holly get married in the book, but in the movie, this possibility is only vaguely hinted at when Toby, played by Elvis, sings Angel to Holly, played by Ann Helms, in the final scene. Kid Galahad was based on a novel of the same name by Francis Wallace in 1936. A year later, in 1937, the book was adapted and released as a movie distributed for TV airings, starring Bette Davis, Humphrey Bogart, Edward G. Robinson, and Wayne Morris. The plot for this version of the film highlights a bellhop who unintentionally became a boxer and fell in love with his promoter's sister. In Elvis' remake, Mushy Callahan, a former world light welterweight champion, trained Elvis for his role as a boxer in the movie. According to Mushy, he threw off the punches in the close-up scenes in which Elvis is struck in the face. He then taught Elvis how to move his head backward as the punches were being delivered so that each blow would either miss him or barely touch him. Mushy considered Elvis to be an excellent athlete. Elvis Presley's 11th film, Girls, 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 is thought to have been inspired by Frederick Connor's book, Mr. Will You Marry Me? However, this is only partially proven given the limited references. The cover of the book, which hinted at quote-unquote an old sailboat and a quote-unquote Shanghai marriage, suggests that the movie may have been based on the book. Additionally, the title of this book was an early working title for Elvis 12 and the next film after Girls, Girls, Girls. It happened at the World's Fair. This might be a hint that Mr. Will You Marry Me was actually the inspiration for the movie Girls, Girls, Girls. Stay Away Joe was based on the best-selling novel by award-winning author Dan Cushman. The novel was awarded the Book of the Month Club selection for April 1953. It was based on the author's native Montana background. The novel served as the inspiration for both a Broadway musical and Elvis movie, all of which received mixed reviews of its portrayal of Native Americans and were criticized for their funny comedy. The screenplay of the movie was adapted from the failed Broadway musical Whooped Up and retained many of the same plot devices and characters, including Joe's grandfather, who refuses to live in a house, preferring his ancestral teepee. In Stay Away Joe, Elvis starred as a Native American for the second time in his career. The first time was in Flaming Star. However, according to various critics, Stay Away Joe, quote-unquote, stereotypes American Indians as shiftless and reckless, in contrast to Flaming Star, which was a pertinent critique on racism. Live a Little, Love a Little was adapted from a novel, Kiss My Firm But Plain Lips by Dan Greenberg. Dan rose to fame with his book How to Be a Jewish Mother in 1964. Kiss My Firm But Plain Lips is a story about a painter named Oliver Bloom who gets caught in the love games of an attractive young woman. Oliver Bloom, Elvis' character, became Greg Nolan in the film, and his profession was changed from a painter to a photographer. MGM acquired the film rights to the novel in 1967 and changed the name to Live a Little, Love a Little. The film's screenplay was written by Greenberg, the author of the novel, and Michael A. Hoy, a British screenwriter who had previously written the screenplay for Stay Away Joe. Other working titles for the movie include Bumblebee, Oh Bumblebee, and Born Rich. The movie was regarded as a break from the norm of Elvis movies at the time, since it had a more mature tone than other Elvis musicals, as well as strong language, drug references, and an implied sexual encounter. In contrast to other Elvis movies, Charro was the only Elvis movie that was novelized after the film rather than being based on or adapted from novels. Written by Harry Whittington, a notable Pulp Fiction writer and one of the pioneers of the paperback novel, Charro, the novel, was developed from the original story by Frederick Lewis Fox. The story of Charro by Fox contained many violent scenes that were dropped from the film altogether, but in the book by Whittington, all of the violent scenes were included. For an example, the original opening scene in the movie, which called for female nudity, was substituted with a more gentle bar scene. The role of Jesuit was originally offered to Clint Eastwood, but he turned it down. Elvis enthusiastically agreed to the role after seeing the serious, song-free script, but when the day came for his first day of filming, he was dismayed to discover that the script he had previously agreed to had completely altered. Despite making a good profit, the movie did not receive as well as some of Elvis' previous films. The absence of songs disappointed many of his fans, and the movie as a whole failed to impress critics. In 1959, MGM originally set Glenn Ford to play lead for The Trouble with Girls and Elvis playing a supporting role. However, the production was shelved and two writers, Dave Keene and Dwight Babcock, turned it into a novel called Chautauqua in 1960. 4 years later, in 1964, the studio announced that Dick Van Dyke would feature in the movie called Chautauqua, which was based on a different book by Gay McLaren called Morally We Roll Along. After several years of unsuccessful screenplays and cast changes, MGM sold the rights to Columbia Pictures in May 1965 without realizing that Columbia Pictures was having the same difficulties. As a result, in April 1968, Columbia sold the rights back to MGM with Elvis as the lead actor and the decision to base the book on the Keene-Babcock novel. The producer originally intended for the movie to have the same name as the book, Chautauqua, but changed it to The Trouble with Girls because they feared the audience wouldn't understand what it meant. So, what exactly is Chautauqua anyway? A Chautauqua is a school that provides education combined with entertainment, founded in 1874. In the early 1900s, the Chautauqua program traveled by train across the country, bringing its lecture to the people. Just like the opening scene of the movie, where Elvis stars as Walter Hale, the manager of a traveling Chautauqua, came down from the train. Well, that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have read any of the novels, please share your thoughts about it. Make sure to hit the white subscribe button below on the right for the newly uploaded shorts and videos.